Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Fifth Paradigm, the official podcast of the Patriot Review. How are you doing?
Doing well, Archit. It's a morning here in the United States, the morning after the debate.
Yes, sir. So right off the bat, you mentioned about debates. So what do you think of the debates and how do you think both the candidates performed?
Well, you have to put the debate in historical context, and it was unlike any previous televised presidential debate. And the first one was in 1960, and then we've had them regularly every 4 years since 1976. And what we saw last night was that one of the candidates did not follow the rules, that were agreed to by his campaign organization. And so it became very, very difficult to watch and difficult to follow. So it really was a very unusual debate.
Yes, sir. I don't think the audience and the voters really gained a lot from the debate. What would you say, how was the performance of Chris Wallace as a moderator, as there are voices on the both sides? One interesting thing I found was I was following Fox just after the debate, and even Fox were very critical of him, even though he works for them. So how do you rate the performance of the moderator there?
Yes, unfortunately, Chris Wallace was not able to enforce the rules. I think he was intimidated by the fact that he was trying to enforce rules against the President of the United States, and that was a very intimidating situation for him. Also, I think he wanted to give President Trump a fair opportunity to make his case to the American people, and so he was restrained in, I think, coming down very hard on the president.
Yes, sir. One other thing about the debates, and this is something I've seen very closely with President Trump, is that he doesn't really focus on winning the debates. He focuses on being the showman of the debate. He wants to be the focus always. Um, and it worked for him in 2016. On merit, you wouldn't say that he actually won the debates against Hillary, but some of his comments, like, if I was the person in charge of law and order in the country, you would be in jail. So, these things have seemed to work for him. Would you say that he went with a very, very similar strategy, even in this debate, not talking about policies much, but trying to put Biden off his game?
Yes, so he was basically following his approach in the 2016 debates, and when public opinion polls were done and the American people were asked who won the debates, 2/3 of respondents said Hillary Clinton won the debates. But what President Trump does is he appeals to his base. So he's used to holding campaign rallies. He has one almost every day now. And so he's talking to Trump followers. And that's the group that he is always talking to. So it's very unusual because usually in presidential elections, once the Democratic primary and the Republican primary is over, the Democratic candidate moves away from the left and tries to appeal to undecided voters, moderate voters. And the same thing with the Republican candidate. The Republican candidate tends to move away from the right and tries to appeal to that same group of undecided, moderate voters. But President Trump does not do that. He has a very, very different strategy to winning. And his strategy is to mobilize his base and get his base energized. And he thinks that worked for him in 2016, and it should work for him again in 2020.
Yes, sir. You mentioned a really interesting point about how the Democrats usually tend to turn towards the moderate side of the political aisle in these debates, and even Joe Biden, I think, on a couple of issues, he had a very moderate stance, especially when it came to the topic of defunding the police and even the Green New Deal, I would say. Right. So
yeah, even on healthcare. So on healthcare, on the environment, on the police, he takes a very moderate position, and he distances himself from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. He says, "I'm not Bernie Sanders."
Yes, sir. And another interesting thing now that we're talking about it was how he said, "I am the Democratic Party," and that was something you would expect Trump to say. Of course, he says it too, but I wasn't expecting Biden to, say something like that. I'm guessing he's also trying to reach a level of, I wouldn't say narcissism, but the lack, but because of the lack of the better word, I would use narcissism in this case.
I
Yeah, so
think the
that
best way to
was.
understand Archit is that Biden is making the point that the Democratic Party is unified, and he's the leader of that united party, which consists of many different groups and factions. Whereas Trump, many Republicans are opposed to Trump, and many former members of his own administration have turned against him. So Trump is not the leader of a unified Republican Party, but Biden is the leader of a unified Democratic Party.
Yes, yeah, and even the progressive wing, AOC and Bernie Sanders have been very vocal about supporting Biden. Okay, so now that we have discussed debates briefly, uh, let's move on to another topic. How would you explain, or how would you rate Trump's performance in the White House in the last 4 years?
Well, he's certainly done some very remarkable and positive things. I would say his tax cut was very good for the country and good for the economy. You saw the results of the tax cut and deregulation of business, that unemployment went down to record lows. The stock market shot up to record highs. And so the economy was, in fact, doing quite well before the coronavirus pandemic hit. So I would give him high marks with regard to economic leadership. Also, I think he's done a good job in dealing with the whole issue of the culture war. That there's an effort, again, by the far left in the United States to turn against our history and to rewrite the history and to reclassify heroes, people that we have traditionally regarded as heroes, classify them as villains. So I think he's been courageous in opposing that movement, trying to protect statues, for example, the names of military bases, that kind of thing. So I give him high marks for that as well. And thirdly, I would say he's done a good job with the Supreme Court. I really applaud his 3 nominations and 2 appointments so far. Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, and now Amy Coney Barrett, because I think the Supreme Court had gone too far in ignoring public opinion and moving away from the Constitution. So I would give him high marks on those 3 areas. However, in other areas, for example, international relations, I give him a low marks there, because the United States, since World War II, has been the leader of the free world and has been promoting the expansion of democracy, free markets, liberalism, respect for human rights. And we do that through institutions and through alliances. The US built, the major international multilateral institutions, the United Nations and its agencies like the World Health Organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the World Trade Organization, even the European Union was an American project. And our alliances are critical to support that democratic effort. So Canada, United Kingdom, countries of Western Europe, Australia, Japan, India now, those are our key allies. And Trump has mistreated, in my opinion, many of our most important allies.
Yes, sir. Madhav just joined. He's my co-host.
Yes, sorry, extremely sorry for the delay. I was having connection issues.
Yeah, you both have great backgrounds. So I applaud you for those.
Yes, sir. I just got this background today, because of the debates. But this is our usual background. So yes, sir. Like in 2016, when the elections were going on, and I was a Trump supporter, but I did not know much. But even I thought that if he wins, his winning was very unexpected. But if he wins, I genuinely didn't think he would be as good as on some issues he is. And one can say that he was a wrecking ball, but some of the things which he has done in the last 4 years, especially coming to the Middle East, those things have been really, really impressive. And I don't think any of us saw coming someone with Trump's temperament could pull that off. So yeah, those are a couple of things that really, really impressed me.
Yes, what's happened with Israel is definitely a positive development. With some of the Arab states now recognizing the legitimacy of Israel and treating Israel as a normal country. I think that's very positive.
Yes, sir. So Madhav, we just talked about the debate and we talked about President Trump's performance. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So the first question that I had for you was that the debate that we had today, I mean, apart from the comical stance that many people are taking about the debate, what do you feel was the key takeaway from the debate today? Because many people are saying that Trump's stand on climate change has suddenly changed, especially considering what he spoke in today's debate. So what do you think about that?
No, I don't think his stance on climate change has changed. You're right. He didn't deny climate change. Or he said, well, maybe it is true. Maybe there's some truth in it. But I didn't think it was a very sincere position on his part. And he didn't say. Remember, he attacked the New Green Deal in very strong terms. So I didn't get the impression that he's changed his basic position on climate change. I think one of the takeaways is his statement about white supremacists, especially the Proud Boys. That's getting a lot of press here in the United States. So I think many people are taking away the fact that he's being very consistent with what he said about the far right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, that turned violent. And he said there are, good people on both sides. And so his statement about the Proud Boys also tells me that he sees white supremacists as one of his supporting groups.
Yes, sir, absolutely. So continuing from that, we recently also saw that he's wanting to designate KKK and Antifa as terrorist organizations. So where does that fit into this entire narrative of his?
Yeah, first of all, he doesn't have the authority to do that. The president doesn't have the authority to declare groups terrorist groups. And also, we have no domestic terrorism law. In the United States, we do have, foreign terrorist laws where the State Department can declare, groups as terrorist organizations. But the president by himself, doesn't have that authority, and we don't have a law that covers domestic terrorism. And I think he made the point about the KKK because, again, it was in the context of appealing to Black voters, and he believes that he's done more for African Americans than any other president other than Abraham Lincoln. And so he's using that as a way of appealing to Black voters. And then with regard to Antifa, again, we saw last night in the debate that he regards the threat from the far left as far greater than the threat from the far right. And he's in conflict with his own administration there because the FBI has said that Antifa is a very loose network of organizations. It's not really a highly organized terrorist or extremist organization.
Yes, sir. Yes. Archit?
Sure, sir. Talking about that, so we are outsiders, when it comes to U.S. politics, and when we look at mainstream media, it's always, you either watch CNN or you either watch Fox. There is barely any middle ground, and what happens? Like for me personally, what happened was the things that really got me into US politics. Subject was some political commentators like, especially like Ben Shapiro and, the Daily Wire and Michael Knowles. So what do you think about these people and what do you think is the role of um, uh, people who are not from mainstream media in shaping public perception, because what we are seeing right now is amongst youth, especially, there was a survey conducted by the Cato Institute that the people from 21 to 27 years of age don't really trust mainstream media. So they look for certain other sources of media. So what do you think about these commentators and in general?
Yes, back in the 1950s and 1960s, television news came from three networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and people like Walter Cronkite were very middle of the road, very nonpartisan newscasters. They thought their obligation was simply to read the news without making commentary. Although Walter Cronkite did turn against the Vietnam War, and he started announcing how many American soldiers were killed, each day. And so it was obvious that he was trying to persuade public opinion against the Vietnam War. But all of this changed, as you know, with the development of cable television, and the same rules that apply to broadcast television about words that you can use and cannot use, those standards do not apply to cable television. And so you got to see a lot more extreme networks and shows, including news programs. And then, of course, when Dick Cheney was vice president, that's when Fox News was established. And it was a great experiment because nobody could tell whether a conservative news network could actually succeed or not, but it succeeded extremely well, as you know. And then I would say also talk radio played a big role in all of this. Howard Stern, for example, the shock jock, he became extremely popular, especially with young people, the people you're talking about. So this combination of cable news, which is now 24/7, so there has to be something exciting, to report constantly. And of course, Donald Trump provides that through his tweets. So you have cable news, 24/7 news cycle. You have shock jocks on talk shows, radio. Rush Limbaugh, for example, on the conservative side. You also have social media, and with social media, you completely bypass the established media. So it allows individuals to talk directly to large audiences without going through media organizations. So those developments since the 1980s have really changed the way news is communicated and really changed our politics as well.
Yes, so that's really interesting. Madhav, you want to go ahead?
Yes, sure. So my next question to you is about Trump wanting to designate Amy Coney Barrett as the Supreme Court judge before the November elections. So does that really have an impact, and how do you see that particular choice as, do you think it's a viable choice, or somebody else would be a better fit?
Well, actually, I think she's a good choice. She's a very solid legal scholar. She's was a professor of law at Notre Dame. She has been a judge now, for appellate court judge for 3 years. She clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia. He was very impressed with her intellect. So I think she's a good, solid choice. So I applaud President Trump for that. And then in terms of whether she should be confirmed before the election, obviously that's up to the Senate and up to the Democrats, whether they can delay. They can't stop the confirmation, but they may be able to delay it. So it's not clear yet whether the vote in the Senate to confirm her will occur before November 3rd or after. I know there's a lot of concern about the case involving the Affordable Care Act that is scheduled to come before the court a week after the election. And she's stated, in writings that she's very skeptical of the legality of the Affordable Care Act. As you saw last night, Vice President Biden really honed in on that and talked about how Trump and his administration and his appointments to the Supreme Court are putting the Affordable Care Act in jeopardy.
Yes, sir. That's really interesting, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying was, she sadly passed away. Was one of the most 2020 things to happen in this year, given the political scenario. So related to that, there are speculations that this election could definitely go to the court, and especially in some specific states. Pennsylvania is one state that they are suspecting that it could go to the court, given the how tightly it's contested. So how would you do you think this is going to be this is going to be a big roadblock when it comes to Democrats winning this election in the events that this election goes to the courts?
Yeah, so the Trump administration and the Republican campaign organization, for a long time, they've been assuming that the election will be decided by the court just as it was in 2000. So the Trump organization is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on legal fees, and they've been filing cases all over the country. So this has been going on for several months now. So it's one of the largest barrage of election-related lawsuits ever filed in American history. So they're assuming that, yes, the election will be decided by the court. Now, there's a problem there because of the deadlines. As you know, the election itself must take place under the Constitution on November 3rd. And then on December 14th, the electors must meet in their respective states to cast their votes under the Electoral College system. And then on January 3rd, the new Congress will be sworn in. And then 3 days later, the Electoral College ballots will be officially counted in the Congress on January 6th. And then the new president must be sworn in on January 20th. So all these dates are fixed in the Constitution. And so all these lawsuits could raise issues about whether those, what will happen, on those constitutionally specified days.
Yes, sir. That's particularly very interesting. Given President has also stated certain things that he might not leave the White House, and on the other hand, the Democrats also have said things along similar lines. Hillary Clinton on record stated that Joe Biden should not concede the race on any on any terms. So it surely could get chaotic, and we could have a repeat of what happened in 2001 when Al Gore v. Bush. So that this is something really interesting to see, and especially when I'm studying it as a subject, I cannot be more excited about anything else. Madhav, you wanna add something?
Yes, absolutely. So stemming from the question that Archit asked you earlier about the election going to the Supreme Court, in today's debate, we also saw that there was a segment on understanding the mail-in ballot system and whether and how it affects the integrity of the elections overall. So what do you think about that? Do you think that it's the mail-in ballot system as such is going to be effective? And do you think can it be fraudulent or not really?
Yes, so again, history is a good guide here. So we have had mail-in ballots for a very, very long time. President Biden, Vice President Biden pointed out during the debate that mail-in ballots began during the Civil War, when Union soldiers were in their camps and couldn't go to their homes to vote. And so the US government gave them ballots to fill out and mail back to their home state. So we've had mail-in ballots, absentee ballots for 150 years. So this is a very normal part of the American electoral system. What's different this year is the coronavirus. So many Americans, especially older Americans, are reluctant to go to a public polling place for fear of contracting coronavirus. And so they have requested mail-in ballots. Other states, 5 states already mailed ballots to voters. They didn't have to solicit them. But now there are 8 states that are sending out ballots to all registered voters. And President Trump attacked that whole process of mailing out unsolicited ballots last night in the debate. But again, 5 states had already been doing this, so it's not something brand new. So what is new is the sheer volume of postal ballots that will be submitted. And so the Postal Service becomes a critical player here, because it's very important that for the electoral system to work, that the Postal Service process the ballots, delivers the ballots on time so they can be counted. So it's just the volume, but not the principle itself that's new.
Yes.
Also, it's important to understand that in America, we have early voting. So here in Indiana, I can vote on October 6th. So I just simply have to go to the county courthouse in downtown Muncie and cast my ballot in person there. So early voting has been taking place in many states already. So this is another feature of our electoral system, early voting.
Yes, so that's really interesting, and we'll see how things pan out over the course of next month, and even during the election week. So moving on to a different topic. So this year has been really, really turbulent, starting with the pandemic, and then what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. What do you think about the Black Lives Matter movement and the riots that followed? Of course, the Black Lives Matter, of course, does not itself professes these riots, but there are certain groups, and we have seen, some of the American cities burned. So, what do you think about this, and what do you think how effective would be in changing the course of the election this year?
Well, I was alive during the 1960s, 1970s, when there were massive riots in our major cities every summer. And entire blocks of our cities were burned to the ground. So the Watts neighborhood in Los Angeles, downtown, the 14th Street area of Washington, D.C., south side of Chicago. So those riots were very, very extensive and extremely violent. And this year, 2020, yes, there have been some riots, but they haven't been nearly on the scale of those, from the 70s. And also, it's very important that the right of Americans to protest peacefully, be preserved. Many of our civil rights groups have been inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, for example, and the whole nonviolence movement. So I applaud, Martin Luther King Jr. He was a great disciple of Gandhi's, and he advocated civil disobedience, where you intentionally break the law knowing you're going to be arrested and punished, but you're trying to protest against injustice. But you're not, by definition, you're not violent. So violence undermines democracy, riots undermine democracy, but not, nonviolent, peaceful protest.
Yes, that's really interesting. However, there were a couple of instances where things really got off the hands, and things really became more than just George Floyd and more than just police brutality, which is a problem in the United States from what we are seeing. One of the example could be what happened in Seattle with the Capitol Hill autonomous zone. A bunch of, I wouldn't say they were Antifa protesters, but I think some of them were grabbed a piece of land and just, I don't know if they made a separate country, a socialist state, as such. So, what do you think about the like answering this question and following up on that? What do you think about the rise of postmodernism and socialism? I wouldn't say there's a rise yet, but there is a wave going on from what I'm seeing. So, what do you think about these two phenomena?
Well, again, if you think about protests in the United States in recent decades, you had the civil rights movement, of the 1960s. Then you had the anti-war movement, the movement against the Vietnam War, 1960s, 1970s. So you had two very different types of protests. The white liberals or white, young people on the left were very active in the anti-war movement. And so this is not, again, not unusual, for students, for example, intellectuals to join protests. In terms of the rise of postmodernism, that again also was present during the anti-war movement. Think about hippies, for example. That whole idea, the hippies came out. That movement came out of postmodernism. So these individuals don't believe, there's any absolute truth. There's no that liberalism, democracy, constitutionalism. These things are all social constructs, and so the most important challenge that any individual has is to create your own self. And to live an authentic life in accordance with the self that you have designed. So you do see the evidences of this in the streets of Seattle and Portland.
Yes, sir, absolutely. So stemming from the different examples that you just stated out right now, I'd like to ask you about what are your thoughts on the critical race theory, and do you feel that it should be banned or not really?
Well, what aspect of critical race theory do you think is controversial?
So now, Archit, do you have something to add to this, or?
Yes, sir. So I haven't studied it personally, but from what I've heard from the conservative side of the aisle is that it it promotes, although what the conservatives say, this is not my own opinion, is that although we should acknowledge what happened to African Americans post 1964 and with the slavery, with the Jim Crow laws, there are certain things in that theory that promotes a sort of racial divide, which is not good for the country, especially now that they have equal laws for everyone. Although yes, systemic racism is an issue and it needs to be solved. It doesn't really add anything substantive to the solutions of the conflict. And apart from that, I think the major concern they have is on what's happening in college campuses. There is sort of extra pandering to the African Americans, which even they don't per se like, except some of the intellectual class. So people are saying that this is the reason why the divide is broadening a bit. That's what I've heard. I've personally noted the theory myself.
Yes, again, going back to the 1960s and 70s, we had something called a Black Power movement. And the Black Panthers, for example, were organized to advocate separatism for Blacks. And so, and many universities established African American studies programs because many Black faculty members could not earn tenure at many universities because they didn't publish enough in peer-reviewed journals. So universities started establishing these special programs to study African Americans and the history of African Americans, and they appointed Black faculty members. They earned tenure, and they also established their own journals, Journal of African American Studies, so they could have an outlet, for their publications. So many on the right are very critical of this, kind of low, they regard as lowering of standards in order to pander toward basically you're admitting that black people are not at the same level as white scholars are, and therefore they have to have a kind of a segregated, enclave within the university itself. And then, of course, the whole narrative about white racism leading to slavery, and then second-class citizenship, the Jim Crow system, racial segregation, and then this leads to the demand for reparations to blacks for the suffering and injustice that they endured. That's so to the extent that critical race theory encourages blacks to think of themselves as a separate group from whites, that is very concerning to me. Because you just said in America today, we have equal opportunity. And so therefore, because of the laws that were passed, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Supreme Court has permitted affirmative action or racial quotas. So because of this change in the legal system since the 1960s, we would like to think that all Americans, regardless of race or color or ethnicity, have the same opportunity to be successful.
Yes, sir. That's very interesting. And while you were speaking, some of the examples came in my mind of how this theory is being used in a very, the theory itself isn't that bad, but the interpretation of it and the fringes of it have resulted in some things. So recently there was a movement that said hashtag STEM is racist. And basically science is racist. And recently 19 families in Georgia purchased around 90 acres of land to build a safe space for just black Americans. So yeah, these things I personally feel are a bit concerning, especially if you look at countries like even India. I would say India, although is much better than some of the other countries in the region, the situation of its citizens is really bad, and the way the US treats them is by far, from what I've seen in India, is by far the best. Although yeah, there are certain glitches, and police brutality is obviously an issue. So yeah, these are the couple of things that really scare me about this theory. But I'm not sure banning it is the right way to go about it by the president.
Well, we shouldn't ban any theories. We should have academic freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And I'd like to encourage debate about the merits and strengths and weaknesses of these theories. But I did want to go back to your comment, Madhav, about postmodernism, because what you saw this last night again in the debate on the part of President Trump was this attack on science. And this has been a very important part of his presidency and of his campaign with regard to not only climate change, but also the coronavirus. And this is part of postmodernism's agenda, is to show you that science is not based on absolute empirical truth. That again, science is a social construct. So you see this attack on science coming not just from the left, sort of the postmodern left, but you also see it from the right as well.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And that seems to be a very interesting way to look at it, especially when President Trump even makes comments like injecting bleach into yourself in order to cure the coronavirus. But so since we've been talking about the idea of racial injustice, I'd like to ask you that in the debate yesterday, we saw that President Trump has been making claims that he has done more for the African-American community than any other president has. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's true, or is it just an open claim, open statements that he keeps on making?
Well, we have an expression that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if President Trump can be credited with the growth of the economy, the fall in unemployment, the creation of jobs, if he can be credited with those accomplishments, then yes, he's done a great deal for African Americans, because many of them are at the lower end of the labor scale, and so jobs were created which they could benefit from. So it could be an indirect result of the growth of the economy.
Yeah, yes. So while we are on that topic, from what we've seen is in 1964 there was a big switch, and the switch of voter base, as some people call it. Republican Party became the party of the white Southerners, and Democratic Party became really famous among the black citizens. And as the Hispanic population grew in the United States, the Democrats became more and more popular. But I look at the history, and I take I would say I take a simplistic view at times. But some of the laws passed by Democrat senators have been would be considered racist in by today's moral standards. However, we don't see the same. Uh, the Black American community still. I wouldn't say all of them vote for Democrats, but a majority of them. So, do you think that there is a switch coming? Um, Again, I wouldn't say it will be a total switch like it was in 1964, but like something that balances the table. Uh, I could support my claims by citing some of the polls earlier this year, before the COVID crisis and before the sad demise of George Floyd, that around 30% Black Americans actually approved of President Trump. So, do you think there could be a change in voting patterns amongst Black Americans?
No, I think for many decades now, the largest, most cohesive cohort of voters who support Democratic candidates are African Americans. So I don't see that changing in 2020. I think again, probably 80% at least of African American voters will vote for Biden. That's my prediction. But I do see a change, and that has to do with less educated whites living in the Midwest. I see a change there. So the 2016 election was very historic because these blue collar factory workers used to be extremely loyal supporters of the Democratic Party. And I saw them switching in very large numbers in 2016 away from the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton to the Republican candidate Donald Trump. So that's due to globalization and deindustrialization. It's the same phenomenon we saw in Britain that led to the Brexit vote back in 2016. So this deindustrialization, globalization is having a major impact on American politics as well as British politics.
Yes, sir. It's really interesting. Madhav, you want to add something?
No, nothing in particular. But sir, you mentioned about the shift in the voter base and how over the years the voters have been shifting towards the other side of the political spectrum. Now, coming to the 2020 elections, so what do you feel? Where are the majority of the Americans leaning towards this time?
Well, unfortunately for President Trump, there's a big divide along gender lines. So he has very strong support among male voters, especially those who only have a high school education. But he's not doing very well among female voters. And I think that one of the consequences of last night's debate was that Trump did not appeal to educated female voters in the suburbs, where he really needs to do well in order to win Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan. So I think he may have hurt himself with the female demographic last night. Because as you know, in general, women do not respond well to that kind of aggressive, speaking manner. So again, he was appealing to his base, I would say.
Yes, sir. That's something really interesting. I find myself. I had a question in mind just a couple of minutes back, but I totally forgot what that was about. Yeah, now I have it. So we are seeing that the Democratic Party is divided in two factions. Even though they're divided, they are very united when it comes to elections. The progressive wing and the moderate wing. I would like to know about the Republican Party more, given there are the establishment Republicans, and then there is President Trump in itself, who's a juggernaut currently. Uh, let's say he wins or even he loses the election in November. How do you think the Republican Party comes back from this? Because what we have seen is he has totally estrange himself from the Republican Party, and his policies, although are similar on some aspects, they are very different on other aspects. So, how do you think the Republican Party recovers from this? Do they build on the same Trump narrative, which provides them with a strong voter base as of now, a very loyal voter base, or do they go back to the basics um, led by Mitch McConnell and yes, sir.
Yeah, so basically the Republican Party, if President Trump, leaves the scene, will be in a crisis. There's no doubt about it, because you have moderate Republicans, like Mitt Romney, and then you have, these Trump supporters, but they're newcomers, right? There'll be I think, a struggle for power within the Republican Party between the establishment, and Mitch McConnell's very much part of the establishment, I would say, and some of the younger, especially members of the House of Representatives. If you go back again to the 1980s, you had 1979, that period. That was the period of Newt Gingrich. Because remember, the Democrats had been in control of the House of Representatives for a very long time, since basically 1932. And so Newt Gingrich was able to galvanize the American voters to actually put Republicans into control of the House of Representatives. He did this with his contract, with America. So I think there'll be a similar effort by more populist Republicans in the Trump tradition to seize control of the party, but the establishment will fight back very hard. And also there's a fundamental fissure within the Republican Party between what are called social conservatives, represented, for example, Mike Pence, who are evangelical Protestants and conservative Catholics. There's that wing of the party. For whom social issues like abortion are the most important issues. But then you have economic conservatives who are mainly concerned about low taxes, low government regulation, policies favorable to business. So they also will fight for control.
Yes, sir. It's very interesting to see how they cope up with this. From what I'm seeing is that the people who are actually voting for Trump, like voting for Trump more enthusiastically, I would say, are the social conservatives, and he has done certain things like banning the critical race theory that really appeals to that group as well. So I'm not sure the establishment Republicans would be able to satisfy these social conservatives henceforth. So this is something really interesting, and let's see how it pans out.
And the other issue is the fact that America demographically is changing. So the percentage of the population that's white is declining, and the percentage of the population that's black or brown or from an immigrant group, that percentage is rising. So the Republican Party will face, really a turning point, I think, because they have to say to themselves, in order for us to survive as a national party able to win presidential elections and congressional elections, we've got to appeal to a broader, segment of the American population.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And that's a very, very interesting way of looking at it, especially the way you explained it in a very simplified manner. So who do you think out of the two candidates is more promising? And considering their policies and what they bring forth to the table, who do you think is going to be better for the future of America and the world for that matter?
Democrats or Republicans or?
Yes, sir, Trump or Biden?
Oh, Trump or Biden? Well, I gave Trump high marks for several of his domestic policies and his appointments to the Supreme Court. but I have to support Biden's view on international relations, because I think the place of the United States as the leader of the free world is very much at risk right now, because our alliances are crumbling, and and the multilateral international organizations that the United States founded that are critical to the success, of a free market international trading system, those institutions are under threat as well. Just think of the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization. And think about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Climate, all these organizations that President Trump has withdrawn from or has heavily criticized. Those institutions are fragile, and without American leadership, I'm very concerned about the future of the rules-based international order.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. So you mentioned about the impact of either of the candidates on international relations, and you gave the example of Joe Biden and how he will have a positive impact in many of these world organizations. But so we cannot look at Joe Biden in isolation. With him comes along, we have Kamala Harris. And so how do you see her impacting the domestic policies as well as international relations for the United States?
Well, I think one reason Joe Biden selected her as his running mate is because, she, I think, fits well within the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. She was the Attorney General of California. She prosecuted many criminal organizations. So she understands the importance of law and order, even for minority communities. Also, she was a big champion of enforcing the truancy laws in California, and the major violators of those laws were, minority mothers who were single mothers who didn't bring their children to school or didn't insist that their children go to school. And so she came down hard on them, because she said, just because you're Black doesn't mean you shouldn't have an opportunity to get an education. So I see her as falling within the moderate wing of the party, but also she represents, the future of the Democratic Party, which is diverse, inclusive. So I think she'll bring. I think she would be a good successor to Joe Biden.
Yes, sir. Talking about successors, who do you think could manage to succeed President Trump and maintain both sides, the fiscal conservatives and the social conservatives, and manage to keep both the sides happy inside the Republican voter base? Do you have a specific name that could pull off this really humongous task?
Well, I think Tom Cotton. Are you familiar with him, Senator Tom Cotton?
Yes, sir. He was also named for he was also a name for the Supreme Court place, but Amy Coney Barrett just won it.
Yeah, I think he represents the kind of Republican who might be able to unify both wings of the party.
Yes, sir. That's something really interesting. So, Madhav, do you have anything? I think we've taken stuff for more than an hour now, and I've asked pretty much everything I want to ask. It's been fascinating.
Yes, sir. So just one last question that I have from you is that from the previous question that I asked you about Kamala Harris and her impact on international relations. So where do you think Biden choosing her as her running mate impacts India as the US and India relations as such?
Well, Kamala Harris obviously has a strong connection with India, through her mother. And I think many Indians are very proud that someone of Indian ancestry is on the ticket for the vice presidency of the United States. And of course, that puts her in line to become president someday. I'm not sure what Prime Minister Modi's position is with regard to her, but I think that, again, because she also believes in multilateralism and in the importance of alliances, I think that Modi and Kamala Harris would get along quite well.
Yes, sir, definitely. That's a very interesting way of looking at it. Thank you, sir. That is all from me right now. I think,
Yeah.
You're very
I don't know if
welcome.
Archit wants to add something.
Thank you, sir. I mean, I couldn't think of a better professor, to bring on for this subject, and you have really, really, helped us for, coming here and clearing so many doubts and simplifying it for many people who don't know how the process of the election is. And, we really talked about both the parties in depth. So it's really, really interesting. I cannot thank you enough for being here with us and giving your precious time to us.
You're quite welcome. I congratulate you for organizing such an event because these are really important moments in American history and in world history as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for taking
You're
out
welcome.
your valuable time and spending your time here with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so
You're
much,
welcome.
sir.